And any concern that I have about what carbide is doing here is very much related to the well-being of the people of India. But we are interrelated. I made a statement at a community meeting the other day that I hoped the people of Bhopal would sue the hell out of Union Carbide, because I believe that only when these big multinational companies become totally responsible, and responsible in the third world as much as here, only then would we have a proper measure of safety.
I don't know, it just left me cold, because I knew what could happen when the explosion happened here. It was such a terrible sound. I was cooking dinner and saw this light, like a light as I had never seen before, and it just almost knocked me down beside the refrigerator. I guess I fell as well as was not being knocked down, but it was so frightening. Consequently, when I heard about the situation in India, I didn't know that it was as bad as it is, but I could feel for the people there because I had no idea so many people would be killed. But to see the pictures, to see what was going on there, it was an awful feeling, especially since you know that could happen here too.
I feel confident, and I don't feel a bit uncomfortable working down there. I told my wife a lot of times, I said, we have a lot of toxic gas. If something should happen to it, we'd be in trouble.
My father would come home reeking of whatever chemical it was he was working with. He'd have to leave his lunchbox in the garage because it smelled so bad, and he'd have to leave his clothes in the garage too because they smelled so bad. And he doesn't really know all what he worked with in the 32 years that he worked there. Because I grew up in a time when most of the country was very afraid of nuclear war. It was during the Cold War, and I think that was still marked indelibly on the minds of most members of my generation. But what I was most afraid of in the Kanawha Valley was an explosion from a chemical plant or a release of chemicals. I didn't know enough about toxic chemicals as a kid to know that there were things like MIC that could kill you just by breathing them. But there were fires and explosions at the chemical plants there. They had the emergency horns and whistles, which you would hear occasionally, and that really just struck terror into my heart. I dreamt about that when I was a kid.
You cannot evacuate this area. We have congested freeways just with normal traffic that probably move anywhere from 5 to 10 miles an hour. The only difference I would see here in Bhopal would be that the people would be dead in their cars. You couldn't get them out.
Good evening. That gas leak from a U.S.-built pesticide plant in India has created a catastrophe. Doctors on the scene are now estimating that as many as 1,000 people, most of them children, may have been killed. Perhaps as many as 20,000 others are expected to suffer long-term health problems as a result of inhaling the poisonous fumes. Here's Mark Litke on the scene in Bhopal, India.
The hospitals in Bhopal were overwhelmed by the catastrophe. The dead, dying, and injured just kept arriving by the hundreds, then the thousands. Doctors and nurses worked feverishly to save people whose lungs were clogged by the poison, whose eyes were swollen shut, many of them children. Tens of thousands had to be treated outside when the hospitals ran out of space. A garden was turned into a temporary morgue, and the lines of people trying to identify the bodies grew longer. Most of the deaths occurred in the first hours following the gas leak early Monday morning. Victims woke up gasping for air, in excruciating pain. Many simply dropped in the streets while trying to flee, never knowing what hit them.
Night after night, as we watched the television news in the United States, the tragedy in Bhopal grew and grew. Before it was over, official figures put the dead at 2,500. and 50,000 or more had been affected by the poison gas leak. Some believe the toll was much higher. Bhopal is the worst industrial accident in history. The impossible, the unthinkable, happened here. And while it happened far away in a third world country, it was the result of first world technology, owned and operated by the third largest chemical company in the United States.
Union Carbide pesticide plant. This is where chemicals are stored and used in the production of pesticides. And it was the most lethal chemical that reportedly leaked out of one tank while workers were trying to correct a buildup of pressure. In the 1 hour it lasted, it spread over 25 square miles. The plant has now been closed down pending an investigation, but in the meantime, authorities here have arrested 5 top Union Carbide officials and charged them with negligent homicide.
Around the world, Carbide has 700 plants, mines, and mills in 37 countries. In 1983, sales from these operations were $9 billion, and profits amounted to $79 million. Chairman of the board Warren Anderson flew to India to offer his condolences.
We have been trying, and we think we're successful in getting things like steroids, antidotes, like oxygen, anything that can be of value to the people who are suffering there as quickly as possible.
He announced a $1 million fund for the victims, only a little more than his annual salary of $838,000. While we grieved for the dead in India, we began to hear about communities in the United States which feel a special connection to Bhopal.
This is Roger Peterson in Institute, West Virginia. Union Carbide's plant here, 10 miles west of Charleston, is the only place in the United States where the deadly methyl isocyanate is produced, and according to the company, without incident for nearly 2 decades. America's potential for problems isn't limited to this plant. Methyl isocyanate is shipped from here to distributors and other manufacturers across the country. The chemical industry refuses to say exactly where.
We began to trace the links of the MIC chain in the United States, from West Virginia to Georgia to Texas. We went to Tennessee, where Carbide for many years made nuclear weapons for the government. We wanted to understand how people in these communities feel after the Bhopal disaster.
You have an obligation to notify the public immediately. I would rather get up in the middle of the night and get my kids down the road and find out it was nothing than to see them on TV dying and suffering the way we had to see the people in India.
Could a Bhopal happen here? What ties bind ordinary people across national boundaries? What questions does the tragedy raise for us? How can we make sure it never happens again, anywhere?
Surrounded by nothing but chemical plants. What am I going to do?
I preach faith, but I don't have too much faith in chemicals.
Until now, few residents in Institute had any idea what was being made in the plant. But in the days following Bhopal, the company moved quickly to control the damage to its corporate image in the United States. For the first time, it opened the plant to press and local citizens. Carbide officials tried to reassure people that what happened in Bhopal could not happen here.
The employees of the Institute plant have been manufacturing MIC in an effective and safe manner for 17 years. We are extremely proud of that safety record. We are confident in the ability of our trained, dedicated, skilled, and experienced people. We are confident in the equipment that we operate, the safety precautions that we utilize, the monitoring systems that we have, and our planned emergency preparedness.
Do you have any fundamental safety equipment here that did not exist at the Bhopal plant? Do you have any of the fundamental safety features installed here that did not exist in Bhopal? In other words, did Bhopal have a flare, a scrubber, monitors, external monitors, alarms, two-stage alarms, such as Mr. Malan referred to? Were all those things present in India?
Yeah. I do not have a very good understanding of the Bhopal facility. We do not have drawings available, so I cannot tell you precisely how that plant was configured, given the design specifications, the manner in which the design specifications were executed.
Company officials repeatedly denied detailed knowledge of the Bhopal plant, but said that process safety standards for the plants in Bhopal and Institute were essentially the same. They also did not mention a Carbide engineer's report later revealed by a congressional subcommittee, which laid out a frightening scenario of what could happen in the Institute plant. A runaway chemical reaction, not too dissimilar from what actually happened in Bhopal.
The responsibility for the detailed design is that of the Indian affiliate. My understanding in this case is that the design was executed in India. And the
company tried to distance itself from the Bhopal tragedy by putting the major responsibility for design and operation of the plant firmly in the hands of its Indian subsidiary. However, when asked whether he meant that Union Carbide officials had never been to Bhopal to oversee design and operation, Browning said no.
We have had people on the plant site. As a matter of fact, during the startup and during the early days of production, a large number of Americans were present on the plant site and did become involved in the operation of the plant. We were training people from India. Many of the Indian scientists and engineers came to this country and were trained in this and some of our other plants and returned to India. But for quite some time now, the plant has been under the operation of the Indian affiliate for the whole time. It's been in their operations, and it's been peopled by Indian nationals.
Mr. Browning, you say you don't have the design drawings for that plant. You say it was the responsibility of the Indian affiliate for construction, overseer of any safety precautions. How can Union Carbide, who owns 50.9% of that plant, in fact, appear to shirk their responsibility here today?
We do not have the drawings. It's not customary for us to keep those things.
Were they destroyed over there? Were the drawings? Are the drawings? What happened to them?
The drawings are, I'm sure if you go to the plant, if we had access to the records in the plant, we would have the drawings, or at least our people over there would have them.
Tell me how much of MIC is in the plant today, and have you, in the 17 years of this plant, ever had any leaks or escapes into the atmosphere of MIC?
So the question is, how much MIC do we have in the plant today? And the second question is, have we ever had any releases to the atmosphere? This morning in the plant today we have 90,000 gallons of MIC in our plant tanks and approximately 67,000 gallons in rail cars that are located in the plant. As far as leaks to the atmosphere over the years, because of minor problems, leaky valves that were mentioned, we have had leaks into the plant, which we have addressed and responded to extremely effectively.
Most of us have breathed it. I don't want to breathe any more of it. So,
What have you breathed?
Oh, I breathed MIC and phosgene on a weaker scale. And if we breathe it to where we cough or get nauseated, then we go to the dispensary and they have oxygen for us to breathe. It's very wicked. It burns fiercely. It just burns your eyes out, and it just burns your throat and your nose that you can't hardly stand it. And it causes coughing, and I'd hate to be trapped in it any place.
So you can understand the symptoms that
I do. I fully feel sorry for the people that had to breathe it and got trapped in it, because it's a wicked gas. I've always felt that if a person was up on top, that you would jump right off top rather than to take your second breath of that stuff.
Up on top of what?
Of the equipment or any place that you could get out of it. I believe you would jump. Yes, we have all the different gases at Carbide, pretty toxic gases that they handle.
Yeah.
And we usually get it's not unusual to get an alarm every day of some type. And if we detect gas, we call the operator and tell him. He turns in the alarm, tells where it is, and everybody in the structure clears the area.
What happened? Wasn't there a phosgene leak
several couple
Yes,
years?
we had a underground storage. Something happened to packing on a valve, and it was pretty much of a leak. I think it was paper stated 102 people was treated, and only 2 or 3 of them remained in the hospital. We've had some lucky breaks. We've had compressors to blow up. We've had some pretty good flash fires where they were cleaning equipment up, and maybe a motor valve wouldn't work, or another instrument that didn't tell them the tank was full and it run over. We had a Crolian fire down there. I thought everybody in the plant, that was right next, just like across the street from me. I glanced up and I thought everybody was gone.
Chromium fire?
A Crolian.
Chromium.
It wasn't the Crolian itself, but what was they were using to clean the vessels out with. And the tank had filled up and run over back onto some hot tracers and caused the flash fire. And I just dropped my head down and I looked up, and there were flames going out the top of the building, the unit, about 30 feet tall. And I thought everybody was gone, but we had one person that was burned, but he wasn't serious. So we have been lucky in a lot of ways, and I think luck is a lot of it is being careful. I feel confident about our end of it, but I don't feel confident about the public's end of it, because we had a release in the valley several years ago from another plant. I'm not going to mention the name, but from another plant. And this whole area was evacuated. People panic. There was no reason to. It wasn't that strong, but people panic. That's my concern. And we're in a valley. It would lay here, unless it was an unusual wind, it would lay here in this valley.
In a narrow valley amid the central Appalachian Mountains, the small town of Institute crowds close to Carbide's chemical plant. The plant is 10 times larger than the one in Bhopal. Predominantly black, Institute was here before the plant arrived during World War II. Adjacent to the plant is a rehabilitation center for 500 disabled people. Within a quarter mile is a state college with 5,000 students. Both were founded for blacks, but now serve black and white together. For many years, residents have had to listen to alarm sirens with one ear, to ignore the smells, to learn to live with their hazardous neighbor.
Yes, it was in June '54. There was an explosion. There was an explosion at the plant here. Oh, it broke out all the windows in all the buildings here on the campus. Broke out windows even as far away as Dunbar, the stores in the main street in Dunbar. We had windows blown out. Then there was the gas escaped also, and I guess they went around up down many of the streets telling people they should leave. I lived over on the side of the campus at that time, and in a rented apartment. And my neighbor and I didn't get the news, and we were the only ones left in Institute. And we didn't know until time for people to come back that everybody had left. So it really was a very bad feeling to know that we could be left there without any word at all. I feel fairly secure here. I don't think people think about it ordinarily. But if you did, you couldn't stay here. And I like it here. you couldn't stay here because you'd always be afraid. Yet I do wish that they had some way of being sure that everyone is notified in case of an emergency and that there is some way to get out, to escape. Because, all right, yesterday I heard the siren, yesterday also. And whenever I hear, all right, but this house is closed. In the summer, I'm closed with air conditioning. And you don't hear it clearly. I was sitting here last night and just barely heard, and I wonder how did other people who were farther away, how could they hear the siren? And, all right, you sit there and you count, all right, then you get a sigh of relief when you don't hear it, when it finally stops, and when you feel that everything's all right. But so often I have wondered just what would I do if there were a danger signal. I mean, to be continued. You can't get out here. If you go up here to the highway, cars would be coming down 25, and how would you ever get on 25? Where would you go? I heard someone say, last week on Radio Television 1, when someone said that they had advised you not to take your cars but to walk. But how quick could I walk up the hill? But you were just about locked in here.
Because you got on that side.
On the other side of 25 is the interstate, yes.
The mountain.
And then there's a mountain beyond that.
And
yes.
what do you have over here? On this
side? The river over here. No, there's no way to get out. And then there's no way to get out along the riverbank. And so we are really enclosed in a little enclave here.
Your little valley then.
Yes, we are enclosed in the valley here, yes.
Was the college here before Union Carbide?
Oh, yes, yes. The college now must be about, 85, about 90 years old, I think.
My first reaction to the tragedy in India was sheer horror. I happen to be a military man. I've seen a lot of death and destruction. It's somewhat ironic to me to go through a couple of wars and come home and be in a place that is at some degree of risk.
You've grown up right here?
Yes, I grew up here.
Can you talk a little about the history of this community and how the college came to be here and then how the plant came to be here?
Started at the end of the last century as a land-grant college for blacks. In fact, my family happened to own a lot of the land that the college is on and that the factory's on. But at any rate, the factory was built here initially to build synthetic rubber during World War II. It's one of the few places in the country where it could be done. And actually, we were happy. I was a little boy, of course, but we were happy because it brought jobs. And, of course, it still provides a large source of income for this area.
There's one thing welcoming the plant here, and there's another thing welcoming the production of that particular chemical here. And I asked the question, there's another plant in South Charleston. They didn't put it there, but they put it in the plant that was in the black community. And I think there may be possibly some significance to that. I would also point out that for many years when Carbide was here, most jobs at Carbide were not open to blacks. They discriminated against blacks until the law made them change their policy.
I find it ironic that I'm on the opposite end of an argument with my colleague, Dr. Hoffman, about racism, because one would suspect that I would find the racism where he wouldn't. I can't make that connection. Anything is possible, but I don't see it. For one thing, are the majority of the workers in that plant white or black? We know very well the vast majority are white, of course. And that plant in Charleston, in the middle of the river, sitting in the middle of Charleston, those plants, I won't say they'd have that same kind of gas because they don't, but they have lethal materials there. I can't make a racist thing out of it.
But the majority of the white workers don't live in Institute. I suppose they can easily say that they can live under these conditions and escape, you know.
I don't know whether you've studied wind patterns and how lethal gases are distributed. A disaster like that one in India would have swept through this valley. It would have really been I shouldn't say it. It would have been an integrated tragedy. And I'm not making light of what happened. I don't mean it that way.
But still in one's mind.
It would sweep Institute, Dunbar, and Charleston, and up the mountains on both sides.
He's talking about many tens of thousands of people.
Yesterday we were told by Carbide officials that they have an excellent health and safety record here in the valley. I don't find that to be accurate. For example, over the last 4 years they've been cited 8 times for open burning of hazardous waste, including burning methyl isocyanate, discharging directly into the air. They discharge carcinogens and suspected carcinogens on a routine basis. In a facility on down the road here, they have a major landfill, the largest within West Virginia. Beyond that, they have a wastewater treatment facility and a transportation facility with known groundwater contamination. This facility is not even Carbide's largest facility in the valley. We have the South Charleston plant, which stretches for miles. We have DuPont, we have Monsanto, we have Fike Chemical, we have Allied Chemical. All of those store highly dangerous substances, phosgenes, others that are every bit as dangerous, if not more so, than methyl isocyanate. And none of them are willing to deal with the public in any kind of straightforward manner. As a matter of fact, most of the health concerns don't deal with this facility. They deal with the South Charleston plant, directly across the river, a section of North Charleston. People have twice the national cancer rate.
I was originally a chemical engineer. I was born and raised in the Kanawha Valley near Institute, West Virginia. Charleston is the state capital. My father has worked in the chemical industry in Charleston for 32 years. I guess I was inevitably influenced by that to the point where I wanted to be a chemical engineer. I wanted to be part of it. That's the big thing to do in Charleston, West Virginia, is to be a chemical engineer and go to work for Union Carbide or other chemical companies that are there. I didn't realize how bad it was until I went elsewhere. The air always stunk. It was like 2 or 3 different pervasive smells throughout the whole valley that you would get on various days. I can remember driving down the river with my parents when I was young, and there would be scum and foam floating on the river. The river stunk. There were no fish alive in the river then. And there was always a black soot in the air in the Kanawha Valley. It settled on the snow so that when it snowed, the snow would turn black within a couple of days. You hung wash outside and the wash would turn black. Your sheets would get gray from the soot. So it was just my experience of some of the worst pollution in the country that kind of led me to do what I'm doing today. And it is ironic that my father does work at Union Carbide and has for 32 years, and I've gone a different path. But I think that even he will see that there may be some things that we're doing wrong with chemicals in our society and in our world. I'm probably more worried about transport of chemicals like this than I am of the manufacturing, because the transport is such an uncontrolled potential exposure, potential accident. There have been many serious accidents involving truck tankage of hazardous chemicals, and those tank trucks are known to leak. Sometimes they leak without accidents, but I'm very concerned about that too.
From Institute, we followed the MIC trail to Woodbine, Georgia. The chemical is shipped in tanker trucks down major highways to this rural county on the southeast coast, where another carbide plant converts it into the pesticides Sevin and Temic. The day we were there, Carbide announced it was returning to Woodbine shipments of MIC refused by Brazil and France. Also on that day, there was a major crash on nearby Interstate 95, underscoring the questions being asked about how MIC and other chemicals are being transported.
We had a pileup on Interstate 95 about 10 miles from here 5 people were killed, 3 tractor trailers overturned. It troubles me somewhat that these tractor trailers could have been full of 55-gallon drums of this material, and God knows what would have happened. I don't think the average person in Camden County knew that material was at Union Carbide, other than the Union Carbide employees, until the Indian tragedy. And my comment was, we'll probably be sorry when we know what's out there. And that's turned out to be the case. But what is even more serious is, I think if the American people knew the kinds of toxic chemicals that in a concentrated area is much more dangerous than a nuclear weapon and subject to terrorism attacks, that's going up and down the waterways of our country and the highways, it would scare them to death.
Are you scared now?
No, I'm not scared. I feel like, Kenneth, that the safest way to process it is at this Union Carbide plant in this county. What scares me is getting it from Institute, West Virginia to Woodbine, Georgia. That scares me.
MIC does not only go to Woodbine. It is transported in rail cars to other chemical company plants in several states, including New Jersey, New York, and Texas. In La Porte, Texas, a suburb of Houston, MIC goes to a DuPont Corporation pesticide plant. This is a heavily industrialized area, a center of the petrochemical industry. 1/3 of all the pesticides manufactured in the United States are made in Texas. Residents are concerned about the effects on their health. Georgia Haskell has a daughter who has a disease caused by industrial chemicals.
We did not find out that it was airborne until after about 3 months after she'd been diagnosed. And we live in this industrial area from the ship channel to the bay with hundreds of plants, very difficult, 60,000 chemicals on the market a day. How do you determine which one? We did eliminate it down to air. But it's a lifelong illness. It does kill. This is in the area, and this was just shortly before she left. This hemorrhaging occurred on her ankles, spread up to her thighs, eventually to her arms. She was bleeding from the nose, the mouth, the gums. Vaginally, she had a lot of abdominal cramping, which they told us when it reached that point, she probably would eventually hemorrhage internally, lungs, liver, kidneys, and heart, which means it would be fatal. In desperation, we had found that leaving the area, she would clear up. So that night, we were so desperate, I just took her out of here. And 10 days later, she looked like this, with no medication. She was under a doctor's care, so it's documented. He said had he not seen it, he would not have believed that she would have lived.
Has she been back here?
No. She will never come back into any industrialized area, and especially this one. You cannot get anything out of the health departments. At first, when the photographs hit the media, I was called a hysterical publicity-seeking housewife.
What did people think when they knew that methyl isocyanate was being transported into this area?
It's just one of many. It may be one of the milder ones. I have been told of others here that are probably 4 to 10 times as toxic as MIC. And we may have it in our air and breathe it all the time. And no human body can stand that constant trauma. You inhale it, you ingest it, you absorb it. And the human body is not made for that purpose.
While Bhopal has focused attention on pesticide production, toxic chemicals are widely used in many industries today. In Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Union Carbide operated a nuclear weapons facility for the U.S. government for over 40 years, until 1984. The town was built by the government during the secret Manhattan Project, which developed the first atomic bomb during World War II. It has always been cloaked in secrecy, demanded in the name of national security. During the 1950s and early 60s, the Y-12 plant at Oak Ridge used huge quantities of mercury in the manufacture of lithium-6, a vital component of the hydrogen bomb. It is only recently that residents have discovered the environmental legacy left by carbide's operations.
Over the hill there, about a little bit over a quarter of a mile, is the Y12 plant. Is where all of the mercury and everything was filled. And in coming all the way around this mountain here, that East Fork Poplar Creek, and it comes right around that mountain and goes right down through this community, just about a quarter of a mile down there.
Approximately 1/3 of the known mercury in the world was in Oak Ridge in the 1950s and 60s. They were extremely complex processes that covered acres of building space. They involved the use of mercury that was at fairly high temperatures, and as you might know, mercury vaporizes fairly easily. It's one of the metals that has the highest vapor pressure of any other metal. It flows. It's very heavy, though. They had a lot of problems with, first of all, releases of mercury vapor into the air. A lot of workers were exposed to high concentrations of mercury vapor. But also due to the incredible engineering problems of pumping large quantities of mercury. They were doing things that had never been attempted with mercury before. They spilled a whole lot of it. I mean, when I say a whole lot, I mean around 2.5 million pounds of mercury is unaccounted for, and close to 700,000 or 800,000 pounds of that is known to be released into the environment from that facility during that period of time when the mercury was being used. A lot of that went into a creek called East Fork Poplar Creek, which flows through a part of Oak Ridge, and it's a part of Oak Ridge which is a predominantly black section of Oak Ridge. People in the Scarborough community there did eat fish regularly. It's really unknown the extent to which they were exposed to mercury during that period of time when the high concentrations were coming down through the creek. As far as large-scale impacts to the public, the Minamata incident in Japan in the early 1970s, late 1960s, was one of the more widely publicized ones, where people were exposed to methyl mercury, which is organic mercury, by consuming fish that had been contaminated by the effluent from a large chemical plant on Minamata Bay. And those people, there were birth defects, there were severe nervous disorders among the populace of Minamata, and that was, like I said, widely publicized. So it's been known for at least 30 years, if not more, that mercury can produce widespread impacts upon people. I think a lot of that was ignored in Oak Ridge.
Yeah, I worked for Union Carbide 33 years. And while I worked down there, I used to clean up the mercury that they spilled on the floor. And I asked them, would this stuff do any harm to your health? And they said, no, the mercury was about like sand on the floor. Only it was a little bit heavier than sand. You don't have to worry about health, there. This won't damage your health at all. I lost a brother, with cancer in the brain, and as I would say for myself, just getting a tumor out of my brain here as of the 8th of August, that I feel that it came from the same thing, but how do you go about proving anything? The doctors won't even tell you anything, and if they know, they just don't want to come involved. So we have all these things that we suffer from, but you ain't got no way of getting no information.
I thought very seriously when we were put back over here and these houses were built over here. I thought very seriously about being, you know, in a place so close to this plant. If something would happen to the plant, who would be the first to go?
Paul and Reverend Williams both will back me up. Even though this city was planned and built by the federal government, it was probably at times the most rigidly segregated city in the whole country. By government sanction. The government did not want to rock the boat. This is not Deep South. Tennessee, East Tennessee particularly, has never been considered Deep South. But the bureaucratic people in Washington, we're not going to shake the boat. We're not going to rock the boat at all. We're going to build a city that won't cause any waves. So they built a segregated city, and in many ways it's still maintained as a very, very segregated city.
I've always thought seriously about this, and I still think seriously about it. And I see a lot of diseases, and I believe a lot of these diseases come from living so close to these plants and breathing the air. And each day I get up, I could wash off my car all the cinders that come from that plant that lands on your cars, your automobiles. So it's got to be into your lungs or somewhere. You got to breathe it. If you're out at night, you're out in the daytime, you don't see the stuff. It's little cinder, fine stuff. So you got to breathe it. So then why tell us that nothing would happen to us when it's happening all the time? It's just gradually, and we dying out.
Well, this was an attitude that the Department of Energy, and I would assume was shared by the Union Carbide officials in Oak Ridge, had about environmental impacts in general in that community. Their attitude was that we're the experts, we are not worried about it, therefore you shouldn't be worried about it. And I call that memo the real PhDs don't eat fish milk memo, because what they were trying to say is that mercury in fish in East Fort Poplar Creek would not result in human exposure, because there are so many PhDs in Oak Ridge, and everybody knows the PhDs don't sport fish, which is ludicrous. I mean, number one, that's almost an ethnic and regional slur at the people who actually work in the plants and live in the community, but number two, it's just not true.
Now they're not going to let you know anything, and you don't go talking stuff. They used to have a motto down there: if you hear nothing, see nothing, say nothing. So therefore, if you're talking, you're subject to get yourself run off from the plant. And well, unless you know what you're talking about, you don't start no conversation on nothing that involves the plant. But I feel sometime, since I'm out of the plant there, sometime I could maybe put my life in jeopardy, in some statements that I have made to the news media and everything. I don't know. But I just feel like it wouldn't matter. That's just the way I feel. And I will press, to try to get this thing cleared up before it kills so many other people. That's my concern, the health of people. It seems like the only thing they're concerned with is the fish and the toads and bullfrogs and to get tomatoes and carrots and things like that out of gardens here. Sometimes I feel, that the mercury is not the worst chemicals, that maybe have affected, but even myself, the condition I'm in now, that I believe, that I've been affected by it until my health is like it is now.
We believe that, or I believe that the radioactive atoms collect in the atmosphere and in all the area around the plant where the soil becomes saturated with this radioactive strontium-90 and so forth, where this radioactive atoms will gradually work themselves into our food chain. And as they work into our food chain, the whole place becomes contaminated. And carbide, in looking to see whether the plant people were being exposed to radiation, would compare the radioactivity at the plant with the radioactivity in the area around the plant. But I believe the area around the plant was also saturated with a large amount of radioactive atoms. So the comparison should not have been made with the area around the plant, but with the general area around the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now, with the people around Oak Ridge, we'll gradually collect the radioactive atoms. For example, the strontium-90 will be collected in our food chain, and the whole area will be coming down with radioactive atoms. And I believe the 6 of us who moved out to the Carnes community downwind from the plant merely had a larger exposure than the whole community is getting, where all the area around Oak Ridge will gradually have this increase in radioactivity that will gradually do the whole place in.
What's happened to those 6 people who moved out with you?
Well, now the 6 people that moved out with us, the 2 of them died of leukemia, and 2 of bone cancer, and I have bone cancer. So that the amount of radioactivity and the danger from living in the vicinity of the plant has been very great. And when I asked Lushbau about the danger,
Lushbau was head of carbide?
Head of the carbide medical work. He had been taken over the medical work from the days of Gould Andrews. So that I asked him how he would know how many people were down with cancer, and he said he was getting that knowledge from the medical records. Well, the medical records only give the records of the people that are dead, and not how many of us were down with cancer. Seems to be, they say, well, you're an old man, and it's sort of, therefore you're old, and therefore you could expect to be down with cancer. But I don't think that 2 people out of 6 should come down with a cancer.
It's certainly more than 2 out of 6. That was just Jim's little clique.
Yeah, that was 2 out of 6.
Between our house, there's another house, and then Shipley's house.
Yes.
And the man in between was a worker at Carbide. These 6 didn't know this other man, but he died of cancer. And just recently, the woman that was a good friend of mine, when she got a pain in her thigh, we said it was arthritis. Checked, it was cancer. Not only cancer, but it was so near like Jim's that you'd think they were twin and they worked at the same time. And she died November 1st.
She also worked for Carbide?
Yeah, and I joked. I said, "Well, you didn't work at we know she had cancer." I joked. I said, "Well, you didn't work at Carbide." She said, "I did too." And here's all she did was collect the clothing that the men had worn during the day and take it to the laundry.
If they do think that that people have to suffer, they should look after them. And instead of leaving them here without any nurses or medical help or anything.
How has Carbide responded to your situation after you discovered that you got cancer?
All they've done is tie it up with legal jargon, so that I've not helped at all, but merely handed a bunch of legalese that I don't know how to handle.
How many years have you been trying to get help from them about your sickness?
Oh, it's now several years. I don't know exactly. But they don't want to help me. They don't want to admit that they have any responsibility. And so if they admitted some responsibility for me, they might have a lot of other cases. And that they don't want to get into.
It's unfortunate that it always takes a disaster before we address issues in any kind of substantive way. 2,200 people to give their lives so we can finally address what is occurring in our backyard is appalling. We should have been doing this a long time ago.
What kind of legislation and rights have you been pushing for?
Well, there are a number of areas that need to be addressed. I think the most important is a community right to know what is being transported through our communities, what kind of safety devices are on those rail cars or trucks, a right to know what's being stored and what kind of safety factors are there, a right to know the toxic air emissions from these chemical companies on a routine basis, and a right to know the toxicological effects of those chemicals, and then a right to make a decision based on information that we've never had before, whether we want these facilities located here or not. Carbide has made the statement that they can make the pesticide that they sell without using this cyanide-type chemical. And therefore I ask the question, if you can make the product without the cyanide-type chemical, why not do it? Why run this extra risk? Isn't the motive really maximizing profits rather than concerning yourself about the health and safety of people here?
The direction that I'm going with toxic chemical regulation and pushing for more regulation of toxic chemicals is to really look comprehensively at what we're making, what the potential exposures to people are from that, the products that are being distributed into commerce, the releases into the environment from air, water, and land, so that we can almost do a comprehensive risk assessment of each chemical. That is not being required now. It's not being done under any of our environmental laws, under any of our toxic substances laws. To me, where this takes us is to the point where the people that are making the profit are not making all the decisions about things that affect people's lives. And that is the critical issue that comes out of Bhopal, I think, other than the issues of what's being done in the third world.
But do you think Union Carbide would take better care of and take more precautions for people here because this is the United States than they might in some of the less developed countries?
Well, I'd like to hope not. But I wouldn't say that they would, but I would really hope not, because a human being is a human being.
There has been an attitude possibly among the general public that life is not as dear in India as it is in this country or in the third world. Life is cheaper. It's simpler to go on and die and get out of starvation and poverty. I find that disturbing. I find that very disturbing. I don't think we should ever get used to people dying anywhere, whether they're here or whether they're peasants in outer Mongolia or anywhere. We're part of mankind, and their death diminishes us. And I'm affected. My welfare is affected because somebody else's welfare is threatened. Maybe 7,000 miles from here. But if he's in danger, I'm in danger.
India reminds us that you can't expect things to keep going all the time. The carbide people here said they haven't had a big accident with that chemical in 17 years. Well, I can imagine a few weeks ago in India somebody making the same kind of speech saying, well, we've had it here for 6 or 7 years and we haven't had an accident either. That kind of statement. So 17 years is no promise for tomorrow.
Well, this whole world is filled with greedy people who think they hold all power in their hands. They will say, do most anything just to make you join their band. And they'll mess up your water and they'll poison your air. They'll send your sons to war just to satisfy their greed. All over this world they spread grief and destruction. And then they'll blame it on you and me. Look at my life, what do you see? There's my land, my friends, my family. What we have, we're willing to share. And I won't let you take my children's dreams from me. I know you think it's better for us to die than to suffer and struggle endlessly. Oh, I can see, oh, I can feel, and I won't let you take my children's dreams from me. Well, this whole world filled with greedy people who think they hold power in their hands. They will say and do most anything just to make you join their band. They'll mess up your water and they'll poison your air. They'll send your sons to war just to satisfy their greed. All over this world they spread grief and destruction. And I won't let them take my children's dreams from me. Well, we are here and we won't go anywhere. No, I won't let you take my children's dreams from me. Oh, I won't let you take my children's dreams from me.